The translation from Chinese to English is, facing Qiao Yanzhu, Xia Zibai decided to pretend not to know him, but Qiao Yanzhu was very curious about her changes. What secrets does this girl have? This pharmacy had many kinds of medical ingredients, and they weren't cheap. Supposedly, this shop had many connections. As long as one could afford to pay, 100-year-old ginseng would be available. Xia Zibai didn't need a century-old ginseng, she only needed some common medicinal supplies. There were not too many people in the pharmacy, and the clerk was relatively leisurely. Xia Zibai stepped forward and passed a piece of paper. I want these medicinal ingredients. Please pack them separately. These medicinal supplies needed to be boiled, and the boiling times were different, so they had to be packed separately. Okay. The shop clerk nodded and began packing the medicinal supplies. Xia Zibai was bored and began to look around. Soon, her gaze met with that of a tall man. When the person saw her, he was obviously taken aback, and then he stared at her. For a while, there was no malice in his eyes, so Xia Zibai didn't feel offended, but she was very puzzled as she didn't know him. After a while, the man seemed to recognize her, but instead of coming forward, he quickly walked inside. What's going on? Xia Zibai was confused, but she didn't go after the man to ask. The clerk continued to grab the medicinal supplies, and she focused again on the medicine. She grabbed a bunch of the medicinal supplies and smelled them. Then she nodded. The supplies here were indeed authentic. They had aged enough. The effect would be better this way. After a while, Xia Zibai suddenly felt a numbing sensation on her back. She couldn't help turning around. When she recognized the person, she couldn't help widening her eyes. Qiao Yanzhu. What was he doing here? The man from earlier was standing next to Qiao Yanzhu, so the man was Qiao Yanzhu's subordinate. Apparently, they had looked her up. Thinking of this, she looked at Qiao Yanzhu with an expression of impatience and disgust. Qiao Yanzhu just watched this girl's expression change again and again, from surprise, to impatience, to disgust, and then finally calm. If it weren't for her reaction just now, Qiao Yanzhu would have thought she didn't recognize him. He couldn't help but think of what he had found out before. Xia Zibai was practically an orphan. Her life was difficult, and she had never left this place. However, she seemed to know him. Qiao Yanzhu had been injured and was a little sluggish, but he could still feel the change in Xia Zibai's attitude. This was very strange. Qiao Yanzhu admitted that it was the first time to visit this place, and he had always been low-key, so not many people knew his identity. So, how did this Xia Zibai girl know who he was? Anyway, this girl had really changed a lot. Her looks didn't change, she was still pretty, but she made one feel very different. Although dressed in just a simple t-shirt and jeans, she was very confident. He could not see her timidity as found in the private investigation. Interesting, very interesting. Unlike Qiao Yanzhu's interest, Xia Zibai couldn't help rolling her eyes in her mind. Why did Qiao Yanzhu show up here? It had just been a few days. Was his injury healed, so he could go out and play now? Regardless of what he thought, Xia Zibai decided to act as if she did not know him. Qiao Yanzhu saw Xia Zibai turning around and giving him her back. He was surprised. This little girl had quite a personality. Thinking of what she said before, I won't see you again. Qiao Yanzhu's mouth turned up in a smile. Then he strode forward. As soon as he got next to her, she glanced at him and moved aside. Qiao Yanzhu was stunned, so he immediately moved over too. Xia Zibai moved again. He followed again. Uncle, what are you doing? Harassing me? Xia Zibai was unwilling. PFFT. As soon as Xia Zibai spoke, the people behind him almost spit up. They hurriedly covered their mouths. Qiao Yanzhu's face also darkened. Uncle, who's your uncle? Qiao Yanzhu was 24 years old this year. He was at his prime, but he was being called an uncle here. Although he had a reserved disposition, he felt pretty angry at this moment. His subordinates also thought this was ridiculous. The girl was only 17 years old. She was not quite a grown-up, and the two had a 7-year age gap. However, they were not that far apart in generations. Right, their master Jew was a god in the minds of many girls. This girl was too much. If others had dared to say so, then the grass on their graves would have been 2 meters high by now. Thinking of this, They looked at Zia Zibai with pity. But unexpectedly, Qiao Yanju did not take offense. He raised his eyebrows instead and looked at Zia Zibai. "Don't you remember me?" These words made Zia Zibai's mouth twitch, and the look in her eyes showed that she was even more disgusted. Two words were written in those beautiful eyes: despicable animal. "Uncle, this kind of pickup line is very dated, okay? Just because you have a good-looking face, it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want." Qiao Yanju's interest intensified after listening to the girl's rude words. He was sure that this little girl got issues. He wasn't a narcissist. It's just that whenever other girls saw him, they were never this cold. His aura, not to mention his face, was not something ordinary people had. Zia Zibai was not a girl who didn't know anything, or who randomly offended people. "Oh yeah, then what should I do?" Qiao Yanju asked with a smile. The men behind him were stunned. They were almost scared to death. Their master Ju actually laughed. Was he going to start a fight next? Many people in the capital city knew that Qiao Yanju was not to be provoked. Despite having a face that looked better than a celebrity, his personality was really bad. The more he smiled, the worse the outcome for his opponent. With Qiao Yanju smiling like this, the girl was in big trouble. "Sorry, we don't know each other." Zia Zibai glanced at him, her disgust obvious. "PFFT. Ha 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 ha." A hearty laugh can be heard from the side. Zia Zibai turned her head and looked. A young man in his 20s was laughing heartily, as if he had seen something funny. The man looked at Qiao Yanju, and then at Zia Zibai. Then he laughed even louder. "I can't believe you'd have a day like this, Big Qiao." "Ha ha ha ha." Zia Zibai glanced at the man, and she seemed even more disgusted. She was speechless. Was it not a good day to go out? Why did she encounter two crazies? She didn't verbalize this, but Qiao Yanju could tell her train of thought. Upon hearing Hua Zijun's laugh, Qiao Yanju's face darkened even more. "Never mind, I'm not shopping here." Seeing the reaction of the two men, Zia Zibai made a quick decision. She turned to leave the shop. The man was likely the shop owner, who probably had a good relationship with Qiao Yanju, or he wouldn't casually call Qiao Yanju Big Qiao. She didn't want anything to do with Qiao Yanju. As soon as she turned, before she had even taken 2 steps, she felt her stomach hurting. Her heart jumped, and her face changed. Did her period come? As soon as she had this thought, she felt her stomach turn, and the pain became more intense. The pain came so suddenly that she crouched down, her face looking deathly pale. "What happened?" Qiao Yanju strode up to her.